Amitabha. On an autumn day in Iran in the year 2007, Samira Alinishad's 18-year-old son, Abdullah, found himself in an altercation with another teen, Bilal. The brief fight, first a shove, then a retaliatory kick, and finally a knife being drawn, ended when Bilal fatally stabbed Abdullah. Bilal ran off, but was later arrested and found guilty. Mrs. Alinejad had already lost a son in a fatal motorbike accident 4 years previously, when he was only 11. Now, with the death of Abdullah, both her sons were dead. Grieving anew, she remained enraged as she waited several years for a sentence to finally be determined, death by hanging. After various delays, the execution day finally approached. Abdullah began to appear to his mother in her dreams. He assured her that he was at peace and begged her to have mercy on his killer. But she wouldn't relent. She couldn't forgive Bilal and wanted him to die. 2 days before the scheduled execution, Abdullah came to her in her dreams once more. But this time, he refused to talk to her. The night before the execution, neither Mrs. Alinejad nor her husband could sleep. She told her husband she could not persuade herself to forgive Bilal. Her husband advised her to look to God and let's see what happens. End quote. Early the following day, they went to the prison where they watched as Bilal, standing on a chair and blindfolded, had the rope pulled down over his head. He cried out for mercy, pleading to be spared, if only for the sake of his parents. Mrs. Alinejad yelled back angrily. Why should she forgive Bilal for his parents' sake when he did not have mercy for Abdullah's parents? The law allowed a victim's heir to personally execute the condemned man, in this case by pushing the chair out from under him. Also, the victim's legal guardian had the right to overturn a death sentence. Knowing all that his wife had gone through, Mr. Alinejad relinquished his right to pardon Bilal to her, saying that he would go along with whatever she decided. At the very last minute, to everyone's surprise, Mrs. Alinejad climbed up on a stool and slapped Bilal hard. She later said that at that moment, her rage vanished and her blood flowed freely once again. Bursting into tears, she called for her husband to help her remove the knotted rope around Bilal's neck. That done, Bilal was officially pardoned and his death sentence commuted to a prison term. Overcome with relief and gratitude, his mother reached out to Mrs. Alinejad. The two mothers, one having lost her son and the other whose son was saved, sobbed together. Mrs. Alinejad later said that her decision to spare Bilal's life did not come until those final moments. She said, I stood very firm in my belief that I want him punished. All these years, I felt like a moving dead body, but now I feel very calm I feel I'm at peace. I feel that vengeance has left my heart. End quote. Well, we've seen forgiveness arise intentionally in some of the previous accounts. It occurred spontaneously in this one. Mrs. Alinejad had not planned to forgive her assailant, the assailant. Indeed, ever since her son's death, her fury at Bilal did not wane. She didn't want to forgive him. She wanted him to die. As the time for his execution came closer and the case received additional publicity, more people called for her husband to exercise his right to pardon Bilal. Still, Mrs. Alinejad could not convince herself to forgive her son's killer. On the day of the execution, as the watching crowd cried out for mercy, she yelled back, asking if they knew how difficult it was to live in a house empty of sons. Mere seconds away from Bilal's hanging, she suddenly clambered up on a stool and slapped him across his face. And with that, she immediately calmed down, and her rage drained away. She had forgiven the boy who killed her son. As Bilal later put it, the slap was a space between revenge and forgiveness. He added that he wished someone had slapped him when he wanted to carry a knife. We cannot know what Mrs. Alinejad was feeling the instant her rage transformed into forgiveness. Dreaming of her son pleading for mercy and assuring her that he was in a good place surely would have eased some of her suffering and sense of loss. Perhaps the onlookers' cries for mercy gave her pause. Possibly it was the pending grief of two more parents losing their son, as she and her husband had lost theirs. Or maybe at the moment that she was expected to kick the chair out from under Bilal, she saw him not as a monster who killed her son, but as a fellow human being. One who, terrified of the consequences of wielding a kitchen knife and ending the life of a human being, was seconds away from having his own life ended. Intensely regretting the grief he had brought his parents, burdening them with the shame they now had to carry. Possibly, Mrs. Alinejad sensed all the above as she looked at this young person who, like all humans, was neither completely bad nor good, neither entirely black nor white in thoughts and actions, but who was one of humanity's infinite shades of gray. A boy who, in a moment of terrible judgment years ago, made a horrific mistake. In an instant, as her sense of humanity arose from deep within her, she poured all her pain and fury into one resounding slap, one so intense that her rage vanished. She wept as she removed the knotted rope from Bilal's neck. This act of mercy and forgiveness completed, a calming sense of peace arose from within her. As the Nobel Peace Prize recipient, Desmond Tutu said, quote, "Until we can forgive, we remain locked in our pain and locked out of the possibility of experiencing healing and freedom. Locked out of the possibility of being at peace. End quote. Whatever the reasons, Mrs. Alinejad forgave from her heart, from her sense of humanity. Her fury could dissipate so quickly because it was not who she really was. Her intense anger was a habit that had been reinforced over countless lifetimes. At the moment of this slap, what remained was her humanity, a virtue of her true nature. Everything else, born of habits, fell away. Tragically, pain and suffering can all too readily overwhelm our humanity and often appear as rage and hatred. We then act, not out of understanding, but out of ignorance. We keep asking ourselves why others act or believe as they do. But we do not want to learn the real reason for all that had happened. We just know that their actions have caused us intense pain, and that what we once had is now gone. A loved one, our sense of safety, the ability to live as we once did, our expected future happiness. And with that loss, our rage surges and we seek revenge. The other person needs to pay becomes our new mantra. Fortunately, there are times when instead of giving in to rage and revenge, we can maintain our humanity and become aware of the causes of the suffering and rage of others. Consider Mrs. Alinejad. Her forgiveness wasn't planned, nor did it come about because others expected it. Indeed, in the face of pleas from others, she adamantly resisted forgiving Bilal until the very last moment, thus illustrating how genuine forgiveness tends to arise more from an inner heartfelt need, a personal conviction, than due to an external encouragement or expectation. The personal conviction that forgiveness needs to be conferred can be intentional at times, and at other times unplanned for, and ad hoc, spur of the moment action. We can see examples of both in previous accounts. In dropping the luggage of hate, understanding his attacker's background and a resultant us versus them mindset enabled police officer Stephen McDonald to intentionally let go of his anger and forgive his attacker. In The Heart Unlocked, after Dan Halleck's friends spoke to him about forgiving his father, Dan examined their relationship and realized that any blame was not solely his father's. Dan, too, had made mistakes. This realization enabled him to stop blaming his father. And as they stood together in the rain, Dan reached out and hugged the father he had hated for 26 years. The motivation and determination to forgive can also be found through a belief system. We saw this in both the Amish and the Muslim shopkeepers' accounts. Both had been taught that they must first forgive others to be forgiven themselves. In other words, for a result like healing and peace to occur, there must first be the planting of a cause, in this case, forgiveness. We learn that while some Amish forgave quickly, others took longer. and some were still working on it several years later. But all understood that forgiveness was necessary, and thus put forth the necessary effort to accomplish it. Forgiveness can also seemingly arise spontaneously, without it being a planned outcome. This can happen when we open ourselves up to relinquishing an attachment, perhaps to a long-held opinion, or to giving up a desire for retaliation, or the conviction that we alone are morally right. Then, by being open to what the other person has experienced, we may naturally react from our humanity as qualities like sympathy and compassion arise. And although we may not be able to explain precisely why or how we forgave, because of the previous work we have done, forgiveness arises from within us. At other times, the reason may be apparent. In The Wound of Hatred, we learned how Ronald Cotton deeply sympathized with what Jennifer Thompson had gone through when attacked one night. He had long since forgiven her for mistakenly naming him as her assailant. In another form of justice, Abdi compassionately asked the judge to be lenient in sentencing his attacker, a woman who had suffered severe childhood trauma. For Abdi, rehabilitation rather than punishment was true justice. In these and other examples of forgiveness, we can see the underlying thread of humanity at work, and come to the realization that we all have suffered in our own way, come to the wrong conclusions, and made terrible mistakes. And that each of us is very much in need of forgiveness. Amitabha.